Right, so you nosy buggers want to know exactly how much it cost me to ride my unicycle around the world. Well, I'm going to tell you in this video. So this question of costs and how much this 3.5 years of unicycling around the world actually cost me is one I've been asked a lot, but it's also one that I've always been slightly reluctant to answer, not because I don't want to answer it, but because I've never actually had an exact figure. But because I'm in lockdown and I've got nothing better to do, I thought I'd sit down over the last week and look back through old bank statements and actually collate and work out the total cost for the whole trip. So I've broken it up into sections, and we're going to start with the initial investment for the trip, so the unicycle and the kind of kit gear side of things, in order for me to be able to start the trip and head out onto the road. So the first purchase I actually ever made towards this trip, once I decided, okay, I'm going to make a go of doing this, was the pannier bags to hold all my gear on the unicycle. In order to kind of build the framework around the unicycle, I decided I wanted to have the bags first, and then I could work with my granddad to then build a design that would accommodate them. So I got in touch with a guy called Carrie Gray, and he's done a lot of unicycle touring, mainly in North and South America. And he very kindly made me some and sent them out for £260. And they were absolutely key in order to getting this sort of ride off the ground. But that was my first purchase. My second was actually the unicycle. So it's a Nimbus Oracle 36er, and I bought that from unicycle.com in the UK. And Roger, the guy that owns unicycle.com, very kindly gave me a discount because I said I was doing this ride for charity. He actually gave me a discount, so I spent £500 on my unicycle. Then it's like camping stuff, so I bought a tent from eBay. It was a second-hand tent. It was a Terra Nova Photon 2, I believe. Very lightweight. I think the whole thing was about a kilogram tent. Very small, but still it was fine for me, and that was £275. My stove was a Primus Omnilight TI, and I think that's the lightest multi-fuel stove that they make, that Primus makes. And multi-fuel basically means that you can pretty much bung anything in the bottle and it will run on it. I ran it exclusively on petrol because I found that was very easy to find anywhere in the world. But apparently you can also run it on gas and diesel. I never tried that, but that cost me £149. And I also bought a service kit with that, which had like spare parts and greases and things to keep the thing maintained, and that cost me £18. My sleeping bag and my cooking pans and my dry bags, they were all given to me by Vango. I asked them, I said, hey, this is what I'm planning to do. Do you want to help out? They did, so they provided this stuff. The same with Climate and their sleeping pad X-Frame, which is a very lightweight, I think they bill it as the world's lightest full body sleeping pad. I really enjoyed it, and it was super lightweight. And again, I got that for free, which is very nice of Climate. The GPS tracker that I carried with me was a Spot Gen 3. And this wasn't for navigation, but this was to update a map to show my position live so that people could follow along and see where I was in the world. It also had an emergency button on it, which apparently if you press this button, it would call the emergency services and they would come out and find me. I never tested this out, so I don't know if it worked, but I bought that for £112. The camera that I used to record the first part of the trip was a Sony RX100. I bought that for £260. And I also bought two 1TB hard drives to store the initial part of the footage for £100. So in total, the kind of initial investment in gear, unicycle and all the kind of camping gear was £1,674. Moving on to a slightly less interesting but necessary segment, and that was injections and insurance. I got a bunch of injections before I started the trip. I think I got like hepatitis A and B and a rabies one and a bunch of them. I don't totally remember exactly what I got, but it was £511 for all those injections, and also insurance. Insurance came out to about £1,000 a year, but in total, for the entire time I was away, that was £3,625. Okay, we're now going to move on to visas. And the first visa I bought was for Turkey, and that was actually an e-visa, which means that you buy it online. It's a bit like buying a concert ticket, basically. You get an email confirmation and then you're good to go. So I bought that one for £14 for Turkey. Azerbaijan was also an e-visa. That was £20. Kazakhstan, I actually needed to buy two. I needed to apply for two. One for one side of winter, and then I took a 6-month break in Kyrgyzstan, and then I returned to Kazakhstan. So I needed to get two. The first one was £20, second one was £50. My biggest cost for a visa was China, and that was £155. But that did give me a 2-year visa. Didn't mean I could be in the country for 2 years, but it was a multiple entry of 90 days each entry. So I could enter for 90 days, I needed to leave, and then I could enter for another 90 days within that 2-year time frame, if that made sense. The next was Laos, that was £25. Thailand was 45. Australia wasn't technically a visa, but it was more like an e-visa kind of thing where you just needed to apply for like an electronic something or other. I don't totally understand it, but anyway, that was 10 quid. And the USA was £140. So in total, all the visas came to £479, which this is the first time I've tallied all this stuff up. That's a lot less than I thought it was, actually. So visas, not too bad, not too shabby. Moving on to flights, another section actually where I was surprised how cheap it was. So I only took 4 flights over the 3.5 years I was away. And that was because most of the time I was just traveling by my unicycle, wasn't I? I didn't take my first flight until I got to Singapore, and then I flew from Singapore to Perth in Australia. That one, must have got a pretty good deal on this one, that was £105. And then across Australia, got to Sydney, flew from Sydney to Invercargill in New Zealand. That one was 228 quid. Then New Zealand to the USA, £489. That was the big one, I guess. And then the final flight was from New York to Edinburgh, which was £256. And then also there were a couple of times where I was asked for extra baggage fees just because my unicycle box was too big. So actually I was hit with 130 quid in fees. So in total, that comes to £1,208, which, as I say, it surprised me just how cheap that was. The next section is other travel. So I didn't only use planes to get over bodies of water, I would also use boats. So actually the first boat I took was from Weymouth to St Malo in France, and that was £40. So that was from England to France, 40 quid ferry there. Then I had the Caspian Sea crossing. So I arrived in Baku in Azerbaijan, and I wanted to cross the Caspian Sea to get to Kazakhstan. And ordinarily, I think the costs of this freight ship, ferry, whatever you want to call it, would be about 100 quid, maybe a little bit less. I paid £200 because I turned up too late, the boat was about to leave, and I basically just needed to bribe my way onto this boat. So they charged me a lot more than was normal, but I accepted it because I didn't want to wait around in Azerbaijan for another week while I waited for the next ferry to be ready to cross. So that was 200 quid. And then the final boat was between the New Zealand North and South Islands. So that was the Picton ferry, and that cost me £35 to get from the South Island up to the North Island. And then I also took trains. I'd never take a train or any other form of transport in order to make progress. But I would have to use them occasionally in order to get out of the country because of a visa limitation and then return at another date. So I did that in China. I cycled sort of halfway through China in the 90-day period, and then I was like, okay, I need to get out of the country. So I took a 45-hour train to Hong Kong, where I actually spent about 10 days with my parents, and then I took that same train back to the point where I'd originally taken the train in China to reform the route, to reconnect the route, and then carry on through China. And I did a similar thing in Kazakhstan when I was pausing the ride in Bishkek. So the Kazakhstan trains came to £100 and the China came to £35 for a total of other travel expenses, 410 quid. Okay, moving on to the biggest section of my cost breakdown, and that's food and accommodation, which it makes sense. I needed to eat and I also needed to stay places occasionally. So I've split this into 8 different legs, and we're going to start with Europe. So I was in Europe for 3 months in total, crossing from the UK to Istanbul. And in that time, I spent £450 on food and £270 on accommodation. And I think the accommodation was mainly hostels and campsites, and then there was a couple of nights in hotels there as well. But total for Europe, 750 quid. Next is Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. I've kind of lumped all those together. I was in these countries for 13 months in total, so that's why this one is a lot. This cost is a lot higher. But the food cost was £2,000 for this time, and my accommodation was £970 for a total of £2,970. Moving on to China. So I was in China for 6 months in total. As I was saying, I had 90 days, took a break in Hong Kong, and then went back for another 90 days. I spent a total of £1,050 on food in China. A lot of rice and noodles, I'm sure. And £380 on accommodation. And pretty much all of that was hotels, because hotels were pretty cheap out there. I think they were £10 or £11 per night. So I would find that it was certainly a tempting prospect occasionally to sort of haul up in a hotel for a couple of days and edit videos, recharge stuff, and just rest up the body, and then continue on the road. So total food and accommodation in China, £1,430. Southeast Asia was similar, 900 quid on food and 500 quid in accommodation for a total of £1,400. Moving on to Australia, I was there for 3 months in total. My visa was good for 90 days, so I needed to get across the country quick. And I spent a total of £850 on food. Food was certainly a lot more expensive in Australia than I found it to be in Asia. Makes sense. And accommodation, I spent 70 quid. And I think that was 1 night in a guest house and a couple of nights in campsites. And that was it. The rest, I either stayed with people or camped, just because accommodation in Australia was very, very expensive. So I didn't allow myself to spend money on that. So total for Australia, 920 quid. For food and accommodation. New Zealand, £600 for food. I was only there for 2.5 months, so that was quite expensive. Food was pretty expensive in New Zealand. And 200 quid on accommodation for a total of £800. In the USA, I was in the USA for 6 months. I spent £900 on food and £600 on accommodation. That was, yeah, quite a big figure. I spent a few nights in hotels there. Not many, maybe 10 in the whole time I was going across the country, but for 60 quid a night, it adds up very quickly. And that was £1,500 in total for the USA food and accommodation costs. And the last little section in the UK, I was there for like half a month, like 16, 17 days. I spent 40 quid on food and nothing in accommodation, just because people were so kind, welcoming me into their homes. So yeah, for the UK, it was just 40 quid that last little bit home. So in total, food and accommodation costs for the whole trip was just under £10,000. So that's 9,780 quid. Hello, I hope you're enjoying this video so far. I just want to take a second to thank the people that are supporting me on Patreon. So thank you very much, Adam Wan, Alec and Theo Beer, Alan, Ali and Baby Bear, Alex Brismail, Andrew Wilkinson, Axel Fontaine, IP, Brian White, Campbell Daff, Damon Walker, Daniel Brom, David Jolliffe, the Dodds family, Donald Brown, Derek Donovan, Elijah Legender, Gaye Denavire, Gary Hull, Jeff and Kelly Elder, Hare Stronsani, James Wallace, Justin Lewis, Kiki Tedger, Malvin Zen, Marcus Bauer, Mark Paris, Matthew Blood, Mike Foxwell, Patrick Hanna, Philip Merritt, Rebecca and Max Stegmeyer, Richard and Martha Walker, Electric Unicycle Collective, Sam Richardson, Sam Winstrom, Sophie Vunn, Stephen Jones, Stuart Carter, Neil Brooks, Tommy Nurmashjavi, Tomo Thomas, Travis Kapita, Tristan Smith, Warren Snyder, and finally Yoshi Chu. Back to the video. All right, we're getting through this. The next section is replacement and additional kit. So I actually bought a new tent when I was in Hong Kong. My previous one, the Terra Nova, it had done me very well. I really enjoyed it, nice lightweight tent, but it really was starting to fall apart by the time I got to China. So I replaced that with a MSR Hubba NX one-person tent, and that one, I used that one until I returned home. I spent £300 on that, so that was quite a big purchase, but it did me very well for the rest of the trip. I also bought a new sleeping bag at the same time because my Fango down sleeping bag was starting to not be as warm during the colder nights. So I thought, okay, you know what, I'll get another sleeping bag. I bought that for £100. I also bought a second sleeping bag when I was in Kyrgyzstan, preparing for the winter in Kazakhstan. I bought that one for 60 quid. And because the TSA when I arrived in the United States had nicked my fuel bottle, there was no fuel in it. It was a completely clean and empty bottle, but because I guess their scanner had picked up maybe a trace of petrol or something, they basically confiscated it. So when I got into San Francisco, it was missing from my box. I had to replace my fuel bottle and pump that came with my stove, and that was a 50 quid cost there. Okay, and because I seem to have a knack of destroying cameras, I actually had to buy a bunch of new cameras on the trip. So I broke my original RX100 when I was in Kyrgyzstan, so I replaced that with whatever I could find, and that happened to be a Sony NEX5T. I bought that for 200 quid. I then broke the Sony NEX5T when I was in Singapore, and I replaced that with the Sony A6000. I found a guy on Craigslist and bought that for £300. I also bought an additional action camera. It was called a Xiaomi Yi. It's this kind of colourful little action camera, which actually had a pretty good picture quality and cost a lot less than GoPros, and that was £50. I also destroyed 3 18 to 55 kit lenses for the Sony, so that's £90, £90, £90. I bought a drone when I was in the United States. I went on Craigslist and bought a DJI Spark for £325. I also bought, in the States, so that I could get slightly better audio, I bought this Zoom H1 with the lav mic that's attached to it. So the Zoom was, what was it? It was 90 quid, and the little lav mic was about £20. And this served to give me much better audio for the later parts of the videos. I also bought a shotgun mic for my A6000, which was £50. And throughout the trip, I also picked up a couple of lenses as well. So when I was in Singapore, I bought this manual focusing, I think it was a Nikon 100mm lens, but I adapted it onto the Sony, and that worked quite well to give me telephoto shots. And I bought that for £70 in Singapore. And another little lens which had a very shallow depth of field. It was an f1.7, I believe, and that was 40 quid. It was taken from an old CCTV camera, I think, which was quite cool. And throughout the trip, this was a big cost. I bought 12 hard drives, spinning disk hard drives, and that totaled £700 in order to store all the footage. So in total, all the kind of replacement and additional kit comes to £2,625. Okay, moving on to a very small section. This is just one item, and this is the Spot Tracker subscription. So Spot, you buy the original tracker, but then in order to use it properly, you need to buy a yearly subscription. And in total, I spent £500 on that in order to give, the peace of mind that I'd have that emergency button and also to be able to share my position in the world. And the final section is the miscellaneous section. So when I was going through all my bank statements and working out how much I spent over the 3 years, obviously I've tried to categorize the big kind of stuff, but these are all the kind of little things like the kind of fuel that I put into my stove, my software for videos, the entry into tourist sites, places where I got cameras fixed, all these little costs which do add up over 3 years. My miscellaneous costs come to £2,170. And this brings us to, well, honestly, the part in the video you've probably just skipped forward to see, the total cost for everything. So when someone next asks me, Ed, how much does it cost to unicycle around the world? I can tell them that it cost me £22,982. And honestly, I really don't think that's too bad. For a trip that lasted 3 years and 4 months, and got me into just some amazing parts of the world, and gave me just this incredible experience. I think that cost is pretty good, and you know, I made it possible by living quite rough most of the time. I would spend, I think I've worked out, it's about 2/3 of the nights I spent in my tent, and then the others were either in paid accommodation, which is the kind of small piece of the pie, and then a larger piece was staying with people. Okay, so right about now you might be thinking, okay, £23,000. It's not a stupidly high figure, but still, how did you find the funds? How did you finance? How did you finance it anyway? So I had some savings before I left, and then I also found ways to make a bit of income while I was on the road. A massive part of that was through the videos I was making. So directly through adverts that played on these videos. In total, Google AdSense, over the course of the 4 years, I made about £4,000 through the Google AdSense. I stopped in Bishkek and taught English there. I made £500 during that time. Also through the videos, indirectly, I have links sometimes which link to stuff on Amazon, and through affiliate links on this stuff, I've made £300. I made £300 in those 3 years. And then the biggest section, which honestly I can't thank people enough if you did donate to me in particular, but it was donations. So on my website I did have a PayPal where I made it very clear that, hey, this is separate. You can donate to the charity here, but if you want to donate to me, to my trip, you can. And over the course of the 3 years, £600, £6,000 were donated through the PayPal, and in a similar vein, £4,000 were donated to me in cash. So these are people that I met on the road that said, look, this money is for you, for your trip, not for the charity, for you. And over the course of the 4 years, I was given £4,000, which is honestly incredible. So if you total all of that up, that comes to £14,800. And if you minus that from the total that I spent, it comes to a total kind of expenditure, I guess, of just over £8,000. So £8,182 that I was out of pocket by the time I arrived back home on the 27th of July 2018. And that's not the end of the story, because even after the trip ended, I started doing talks. I've carried on making videos. I've sold series on Vimeo, and I've set up the Patreon. These are all ways that I've helped. Well, no, I have recouped the costs of the whole trip, and also I'm now going on to work out how to kind of turn this kind of adventuring into a bit of a business. All right, I think we're going to end it there. I hope that answers your question. I hope that satisfies your curiosity of how much I spent and how I managed to make this 3.5-year unicycle trip around the world work. And I hope it helps some of you if you're thinking about doing your own kind of trips like this, budget a little bit more clearly about how much you think it might cost you. Thank you for watching. I'm sure this was a super long video, but I also hope that it was informative. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.